Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of your weekly therapy podcast. My name is Mr. Williams, or Tal Williams is my real one. I'm a social worker and a teacher, and over here we have...
I'm Anne-Marie DePietro, and this is Ruby, and I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and Ruby is a dog.
She is a dog.
She's a
for
dog.
The most part.
She's a big bee.
She's like here for the party, and she's here to love on us, and we appreciate her.
She's like, put me down, I need to sleep now.
She's like, I'm exhausted from all the work I'm doing.
Yeah, this was so hard.
When I was driving in today, I told you I'd be in at like 10, I got in at like 10:30. I don't know if you've ever been driving and like you come across like a Ford SUV of some sort that's like just coming in hot behind you, and then you like slam on your brakes, because I don't know that it's not a cop.
Right.
And the person's getting mad. Like, I can see them kind of like trying to swerve to get around me, and they're shaking their fist. I'm like, here's the thing, babes. You chose to get a cop car. Mm-hmm. So you can be mad that I'm slamming on my brakes and going like 5 under the speed limit. Mm-hmm. But I drove 5 under the speed limit the entire way here because I was like, I'm not about to get pulled over, get yet another ticket.
Oh my gosh.
And I really upset that person. So if you were that person, I'm not sorry. Get a different car.
When I was driving home from my talk last night, I realized I was going like 64 in a 70.
Why?
I don't know.
Were you nervous?
No, I guess I don't speed.
Good. Today, I'm really following the rules.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, I had to set my car on cruise control to make sure I went fast enough.
Sometimes it's going that speed limit. Like, I drove home to Indiana. It is one road. It's the toll road for like 700 miles straight. There's nothing else. And I have to set cruise control because sometimes 70 feels real fast.
I know.
And other times you're like, am I moving at all?
Right.
I don't trust that.
No. I really don't. And especially in my car, in the Tesla, you can be going like 30 miles an hour, like 100, and it like feels the same.
You just don't know.
No.
Because
it's unclear. Yeah, it's driving itself for sure. That's like the best. But like my feet hurt so bad after my talk last night. I put the car in like self-driving mode and just like took my shoes off like right there.
I don't know if I could do that. That sounds like a Black Mirror episode.
Oh my God. Colleen gets so nervous whenever I do it. But I'm like, honestly, I think the car is probably better at driving than I am.
Oh, I for sure know that no matter what bugs a car might have, that self-driving is better than what I could drive.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like it stopped at like an intersection where someone was like going through, like, and I definitely wouldn't have stopped.
No. Okay, so I talked about this the other day on the socials, but I didn't know this. Apparently this has been a thing. I don't know what side of like TikTok or Instagram that I'm on. And because we're on the topic of cars and being able to drive and such, did you know that apparently most guys truly believe they could land an airplane?
What?
Apparently this is one of those things where it's like they ask like guys, you know, there was like a thing a few years ago that was like they did like a, what's it called? A survey of men. They thought that they could beat Serena Williams in a tennis match, and they're like, you've never played tennis a day in your life.
Oh my God.
But apparently there's like a group of men that are like convinced that they could land a fucking airplane.
That's wild.
I want that kind of delusional confidence.
I can't. I mean, one of my friends was in he was a Navy pilot, and I really thought that like all they did was like land planes on boats. Like I just pictured this like peaceful landing on a boat. And then I saw Top Gun and I was like, is that what you do? And he was like, yeah, obviously. I was like, oh, I think that we're all deluded about how much goes into this.
But here's the thing, even if it was as simple as possible, just like pulling a lever down and up, I still don't have the confidence of doing that at all.
Oh, me neither.
There's no way.
But I feel like if someone was like, Amory, you can't land a plane, I'd be like, I'm landing the plane. I can do it.
Baby, I got this in the bag now.
Yeah.
I can't even drive. Like I just got my car fixed.
Yes.
The front bumper was ripped off because I parked at a CVS to get my medicine. I stopped mid-sentence to restructure the word medicine. But I pulled into the CVS and like, you know how sometimes the curbs are a little bit higher than they should be? And so like, a lot of times people like, scrape it a little bit. Mm-hmm. I've done this 1,000 times, right? And I didn't think anything of it. But when I pulled out, apparently the curb was way more aggressive than I thought. And it ripped the entire front bumper off. And I was like, and it was like that for like probably a good 6 months. Like I gorilla taped it so that it wouldn't like, because only one side was hanging off. It was kind of like it was winking. The car was winking. I finally got it fixed. But all I could think of is like, there are men out there who truly believe that they could land a full ass, whole ass airplane, and I'm very confident I could not because I can't even drive.
Like, what kind of airplane are we talking? Like a commercial jet or a commercial jet? Like an American Airlines flight?
Yes.
No.
I'm not talking about a little, pitter-patter one that just, like, goes up 300 feet and comes right back down. They could, like, has little tiny baby wheels on it. No,
like with like hundreds of people on it, they think they can land a plane.
I'm like, okay, you're right.
Do they think they can land the plane in the Hudson too?
Probably upside down and still save everyone's lives.
That
couldn't be me.
I'm shooketh.
I'm shooketh.
Wow.
That was a little off topic, but it's okay. So we haven't even introduced the topic, so we're good.
No. Do we even know the topic?
Honestly, at this point, it's anyone's game.
Oh my God. Well, glad we're here after the whole microphone incident. So.
Oh God.
So today, we were like all ready to film, and by ready I mean we were like an hour and 10 minutes after we were supposed to film, 100%. And I was like, oh my gosh, my microphone is at home in my suitcase from St. Louis. I called Colleen, she was like, oh, I can't bring it, sorry. So I like stomp out, I'm like, I'm gonna go get it, and I'm like almost home. I call Colleen, and I'm literally telling her, open the suitcase, and as I'm telling her, I'm like, oh my gosh, we filmed the last podcast and I was in the office.
So it was here the whole time.
It was here the whole time. The whole time.
That's okay.
Right next to my desk, like literally sitting there.
I didn't see it, so I couldn't, like, if I would have been more aware. And
we know that your focus is so good, so that
my focus is impeccable.
Shocking.
It's scary how still my focus is just like anywhere and everywhere at any
mm-hmm.
given time. And I'm on medication for that. Like, I can't even fathom what it was like before. And that was only, 2 years ago?
Has it been 2 years?
I think so. 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, I genuinely don't know that I can fully remember what it was like before medication and therapy. And I don't know that I want to go back there.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we were sitting there today and you started talking about, what even were you talking about? You started some story and like I knew what I was going to do on my computer and I was doing it, but then it just like blanked and I was like, wait, what was I doing? Like literally out loud, I have to be like, what was I doing?
We've all been there. Some more than others, but. So as we were talking about today's episode, we're going through kind of things people have asked us or questions that people had. And one of the things that I knew early on, like even when we just months ago, like back in November or whatever, when we talked about this podcast, some things that people had mentioned was wanted me to discuss further a later in life, I guess, re-diagnosis of when I was re-diagnosed with autism. And it's something that I have thought about talking about, but it's like, I mean, there's a lot of like baggage that comes with it and not necessarily because of the diagnosis, but yeah. And so I had been going through and thinking about like when I felt more comfortable talking about it. And I was like, okay, I think that now would be a good time.
Today
would
let's do it.
Rainy ass Wednesday.
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, so I don't know, like, I guess before I'm just like, me, because it just feels weird, right? When, do you feel like you've seen a lot of clients for evaluations where you're like, or adult clients that it's just kind of been like missed or like?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's like sometimes it's been super obvious, at least to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this poor individual has been done such a disservice. Yeah. And so I think that like those cases, it's a little more cut and dry of like, clearly this person has it, but like how was it missed and why, and like how do we hook them up with resources, because there are some people who actually do need like support, like say from the county or something, that aren't getting it. 100%. Now, like in your case, for example, like you obviously don't need like support from the county to function, but like those cases are a little more common to be missed because I would say the number one reason why they're missed, in my opinion, is because you're not completely antisocial. Yeah. And people think that if you're high functioning with autism, you need to be antisocial or not make eye contact or not want to conversate with people. But a lot of times I see people who are what I call like indiscriminately social, where it's not that you're antisocial, but it's that you're social without social cues. Yep. And for some people, especially those with ADHD also, sometimes it just looks like hyperactivity. Yeah. Sometimes it just looks like being eccentric or like you doing theater, like it would just be like, oh, he's, an actor, whatever. But it really takes like further assessment and to go back and look at like what were they like in childhood, talk to parents, talk about like what they were like in their like toddler years even, because over time you develop adaptive measures. So if I was like, does it make you upset when things are out of order? And you were like, no, not really. But like, say at like age 7, you started to learn, like, I just need to deal with the fact that things aren't out of order. That doesn't mean that it didn't like intrinsically bother you. That's a very simplified example, but you know what I mean?
But I think like it makes sense, right? So, funny that you said like the out of order thing too, because I think that was like for my parents kind of like the first hint. So, and we'll probably go back and forth. This will not be a linear story, I'm sure. But when I was a kid in pre-K, when I was in pre-K, Mrs. Schrock was my teacher, and I had no ability to socially and emotionally regulate at all. And I think it came to like a head, and I think I've talked about it on the podcast too, of my mom I was sick, and they were told, my parents, they had to come pick me up. My parents couldn't do it at work, so my Aunt Gladys did, but she had gotten a new haircut. She had like the claw bangs. I don't know what it was about the claw bangs, but it fucking terrified me because it was new, and it was something I wasn't expecting. And, I don't, when people get haircuts and stuff, I feel like it changes the way they look, but it really upset me. And there had been many things that happened prior to this of me just being like unable to regulate emotion. And I completely lose my mind. And they're like, called my parents, like, is this his actual aunt? Like, who is this woman? And after they got confirmation, I remember sitting in the back seat. I very distinctly remember sitting in the back seat, buckled and still, but like in fetal position and like refusing to look at her. And there were many things that had been continuing to happen. And so eventually I got an observation and assessed in pre-K and again in kindergarten. And unknown to me until a year ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD, autism, and dyslexia. And I say this because I was never told of these diagnoses. I knew that starting in pre-K, as soon as the first observation was done, I was immediately put into speech therapy. And then I think it was in kindergarten or first grade I started occupational therapy.
They diagnosed you with autism in that initial evaluation?
I don't know,
or was it later?
Pre-K one was, but I know by kindergarten it was. Like I had an IEP by then.
For autism?
Uh-huh. And again, didn't know this at the time, right? So, and I think I was reevaluated in kindergarten because it had gotten worse. Like I always talk about the Q Bear. Miss Holsapple, my kindergarten teacher, and I will always remember her name until the day I die. There was something called the Q Bear at the school, and you got to take it home on weekends, and I didn't know what the order was necessary, but I knew it was going down a list. I didn't know it was alphabetical, and she missed me. And I was livid. And so I think, crying hysterically, if my dad, didn't drop me off the way that he always had, or if the seating arrangements in the classroom changed, because teachers do that, we switch around, furniture and stuff, it would, paralyze me with fear. I didn't understand. I wouldn't even, how do I sit in this chair now? It's a different chair than what I've always had, and I've always faced the door, and now I'm not facing the door, I'm facing the chalk, and I just would spiral. And so I feel like that probably set off the second evaluation in kindergarten. But I remember other classmates of mine that were in speech therapy, because what they would do, they group us. So we would go in 4 students at a time, especially those who were working on the same kind of sounds and stuff. But I also had a language, things wouldn't necessarily, you could say something to me and it wasn't computing. And I couldn't understand why my mom was like, oh yeah, you get taken out of class because of speech therapy. She would tell me that. It was pretty obvious that it's speech impediment. I still do. I'm sure people listening to this have been like, yeah, we can tell you stutter over words, or if I'm not thinking about it, I'll do I would like to call a wed, because that's how I sounded when I talked when I was a kid. And so, and it'd be like, you're really good at it. I'm like, it's because it's the way I talked when I was in 8th grade. But I remember that I would ask my mom why I had to do occupational therapy, or why I was taken out of class to be read to, instead of when we did our state standardized tests, I would go to the principal's office and the principal would read my test to me. So I couldn't understand that, and it was just, it's for speech. I didn't realize that there was anything, different or about me until I got to like 3rd grade. I couldn't read still, and everyone could. And then I heard the word dyslexia. I'm like, oh, I'm dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
And that explains all of this. But then I was like, there's other kids that are dyslexic. Like, Kevin's dyslexic, and he doesn't have to go to an occupational therapist that, like, works on his handwriting, because I was, like, very low-toned. And so I think it was just this, like, repeated thing of just not knowing and my mom not disclosing it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, you probably knew this, and again, I didn't know this, but I didn't realize until the first time I had talked about it, which took me a while to talk about, not because I was ashamed or embarrassed of the diagnosis that I later got as an adult, and I'll get to that, but like, because there's a lot of complexities when you get diagnosed with something that you've always had and your parent knew, but my mom's dead. Like, how do I get pissed off and mad about that? Mm-hmm. But I didn't realize how many parents, until I told the story on social media, don't disclose their child's diagnosis or IP to them.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot about like the stigma of mental health. I think that parents sometimes are worried about their kid being identified as like other, or their kid feeling like they're quote unquote abnormal. And I think sometimes it comes from a good place, but the reality is the more we try to prevent someone from being identified as other, the more they feel other, because a lot of times they know that something's not right, or they don't feel right, or they feel different or whatever. And when we're constantly telling them, no, you're fine, everything's fine, there's nothing wrong, you're fine. It's like you're invalidating them, even like from a young age.
Yeah, I remember there was a navy blue shirt that I had, and there's like a single like light blue stripe going across it, and I can't even remember the material. It wasn't even spandex. It was literally like like those throw-in scarves. It was kind of like that, but like stretchy. I don't know how to explain it, but it was super soft, and it was one of the few times, because this was early 90s, that there was not a tag in it. Mm-hmm. Remember like when Hanes for the first time, like
tagless,
it was like a big thing, but there wasn't a tag in it. And I loved wearing this shirt because it was soft, and I was just like, I loved it. And I would wear it to school very often, and kids would venture like, that's really gross, you can't wear the same shirt every single day. And so I stopped wearing it, but I remember it was one of the few items I could wear that didn't feel like my skin was on fire. And I don't know how to explain that, other than like, obviously it didn't hurt to wear clothes, but it made me just like crumble in.
Well, that's a good example, because say like I was assessing you later and I said like, would you often wear the same thing to school or work or whatever? And you were like, oh no, not really. But you did want to. It was just socially you were punished for doing so. So then you learn like, I shouldn't do this.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that like I appreciate when we've talked about like diagnosing people at a older age, right? Because if you look at the DSM and the way it's supposed to be diagnosed, like a lot of these questions are for children, and we have to realize that like it's sometimes missed in that, right? For me, it wasn't missed, but I was never told. And I also saw an occupational therapist that like I was obsessed with Batman, still am, but like as a kid, obsessed with Batman. It was all I would talk about. Every time that Valentine's Day came around, I would get Valentine's Day cards of Batman. I mean, everything was Batman. And I remember like talking to kids about it, or on the playground playing Batman, and then my occupational therapist was like, finally one day was like, you gotta stop talking about Batman. Like, if you want to make friends, you gotta cool with the Batman shit, because like the kids aren't in love with Batman. And at the time there was like maybe a Batman cartoon series, but by this time like the Tim Burton Batman movie series had kind of died down. So it was kind of like, I think Pokemon was like the big thing. And so I remember like as a kid being like, in 3rd grade, my teacher wrote down on my report card, if you can believe, Telly is what they would call me. We wish Telly would talk more in class. Because by 3rd grade, I'd been told like not to talk about Batman, not to get too close to kids when you're talking to them, don't talk too loud, you have to wait your turn. So I just stopped talking. And you can literally see in my school photos, like my smile go away. And it's because I didn't, like all I could think about was like, it was the bird theory I think we've talked about before, right? Like I wanted to share the bird with people, but I was told not to. So I wouldn't. I would just sit there and be like, okay, I won't talk because I don't know what to talk about. And this is also an ADHD thing too. Like when your mind's working so fast, how do you take turn in conversation? And so I think like that, like I knew something then like just didn't feel right. But again, when you're told like you're fine, you're 100% fine, there's nothing wrong with you, you're good to go, it's like, okay, then like why am I not like everyone else? Then like, do other people have these thoughts, or other kids like scratching at their skin because they're wearing a t-shirt that's uncomfortable, or because the socks that they always like to wear, you know, my parents bought me a new pair and these are scratchy on the inside, or like a mirage of things. And so like it was really difficult as a kid growing up, not only because I'm Puerto Rican and gay in northern Indiana with a horrific speech impediment, but because I also am like unsure of how to socialize with kids. And I think that's like, it plays a really weird fucking mind game on you growing up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm honestly even surprised that you got diagnosed that early, because I feel like around the time like when we were young, people were very rigid on like the ADOS, and like, do you score within the range for ADOS? And if you don't know, ADOS is the standard test that they use for autism, which really it was designed to be used for research, and then somehow we like deviated to like, if you don't score as having autism on the ADOS, you don't have autism, which is a huge problem. And I think a lot of the reason why people went undiagnosed, I think we've maybe like strayed from that more in the last like 5 to 10 years. But did you have an ADOS? Do you know?
I have no idea.
That's interesting. Because even when I first started as a nurse practitioner in 2011, like they were not diagnosing people without a positive ADOS. And I would argue a lot, like, look, they meet the criteria in all of these ways. Like, these are the reasons why they're not getting better. They don't have this support. It doesn't make sense to diagnose them with oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety, bipolar disorder, ADHD. Like, they don't have 4 diagnoses at age 7.
Right.
Like,
and I think that was I think that was a huge part of it, is because a lot, again, as you get it diagnosed, I think young, and you are able to socialize, or at least have an occupational, I didn't do, is it ABA or
yeah, applied behavior analysis.
I don't believe I did that. But like I was taught at such a young age, I wouldn't even know if it's intentionally masking. It's just like what they deemed was what I had to do to get by. And so like I remember at a young age very quickly being told what to and what to not do, right? And or just to like suck things up. And like as I got older, like as an adult and stuff like that, I kind of slipped back into these things that just felt more comfortable. Like we're talking complete like meltdown if like my food wasn't organized in the correct way on a plate at school, or if like it was, I like every time we had chicken and noodles, which is one of my favorite things, if a noodle like was a little bit over the hump and touching like the strawberries that we had, or like the mashed potatoes, I would like feel physically ill. Like it like I just couldn't do it. And it was these things that they like kind of try to like, desensitize me to, so that like as I got older, especially like middle school and stuff like that, I was just kind of like, okay, I just gotta like deal with it. Like I don't know, you know, like I remember specifically like I told the story the other day. I was really low tone, and so my handwriting was illegible. And I was working on it with an occupational therapist, doing like, you know, all these like the balloon squeezes and holding a tissue in your hand and working on that tripod grip. And my 4th grade teacher, Wanda Miller, didn't think I was learning fast enough. And so I had to sit in during recess, again with ADHD, and sit down and work on my handwriting. And it felt like I was running a marathon with my arms. Like it hurt so bad. Not to mention I'm ambidextrous, and so they wouldn't let me write with my left because they just assumed I was right-handed. So I'm trying to do this and be like with low tone, and it was horrific. And I remember being like, oh, like why doesn't anyone else have to sit inside? I just have bad handwriting. But it wasn't bad handwriting. It was low tone and so many other things. I got back though on her, and I talked about this, that I'm sitting there, and I was what my family would refer to as a worrywart. They called me a Chucky from Rugrats. The sky was falling at all times. My sister was a year older. She was in 5th grade. In 5th grade, did you guys do DARE in 5th grade?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she was doing DARE, and so she'd come home excited and like talk to us about the drugs. And I'm sitting there in class, and because I was in for recess, that was Wanda Miller's, it was her lunch period. And I remember one time looking up, and I see Mrs. Miller take a vial out and a syringe and fill it, and then give herself a shot in the arm. And I was like, that's the drugs. And immediately was like, she's an addict. And I'm like freaking out, right? And instead of like asking her about it or going to an adult right away, instead what I did is I told every student I would listen. I was like, everyone listen up. We have someone who's not being compliant to DARE. And we need to alert Law and Order immediately. Like, this is sick.
Olivia Benson,
Yeah.
where are you?
Because we need your help immediately. Like, call Detective Stabler.
Oh my God. Those were the days of Stabler and Benson, too.
And like, we needed them.
I mean, I need them now.
Same. Like,
the reunion of Benson and Stabler was like I was so emotional.
Yeah.
Like, I'm still emotional thinking about it. Do you remember the letter that it was like, in another universe, it'll always be me and you?
And I'm like,
like
get that multiverse of Law and Order up.
Right. In addition to Corey and Topanga's wedding vows, I'm incorporating that into my wedding vows for Colleen.
As you should.
Yeah.
And Mariska Hargitay should marry you.
You're right.
100%.
Yeah.
No, I was like freaking out. I was like, oh my God, I'm telling everyone, like, and I'm not making it up. Like, I was like genuinely terrified, right? And finally, I go to school one day, and Mrs. Miller's not there, and I get called down to Mrs. Martin, our counselor's office, and I walk in. It's her and Officer Hoosier, our DARE officer, and they're like, hey, babes, heard that you think Mrs. Miller's doing drugs. I'm like, because she is. Because she is, and I am not going to have this, not at my school. And they're like, okay, but like, that was medicine she needed to live, and all I could think of is like, she's too far gone at this point. Like, she's dependent
Wanda.
on this. And they're like, okay, no, like, if she doesn't use this, she'll die. And I'm like, damn, that's fucked. And then they're like, trying to explain to me what diabetes and insulin was, because she was a diabetic and taking insulin during class, and I had no idea what that meant. So I literally spent the entire rest of the year just being like, I cannot believe this school is okay with this behavior. Didn't have to do handwriting at recess anymore, though, so.
Wow,
yeah. So
look at you.
I know, so just spread rumors about your
Right,
teachers,
I was going to say, that's a perfect learned behavior.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, if you spread rumors about people, you can get out of things. Mm-hmm. It's worked.
I mean, listen, words to live by.
No, but whenever I tell people about this diagnosis thing, too, they're like, did you not have to do like IEPs when you were in school? Because I think in like Indiana, most places at 14, like, or maybe even younger, the kid's invited to be part of the IEP meetings. Mm-hmm. And no, the answer is no. Like, I remember in 6th grade, there was pods. There was 3 pods that the 6th graders were split up to, like 100 each. And when I did it, there was a 4th pod that was like a self-contained room for people with like learning disabilities and autism and ADHD. And it was probably like 25, maybe 30 kids. And I was put in that. My mom screamed on the phone crying to our school counselor, Mr. Tadeo, to not put me in there. And like, that was like my light bulb moment going into middle school, being like, I cannot talk about having difficulty reading. I can't talk about, like, I just have to keep my nose down and not say anything. I need to stop accepting the help out of class to be like read to, because like it's really upsetting my mom. And again, had I just known, I think that would have been such a validating moment, because I thought I was dumb. I really thought I was like so stupid, and that wasn't the case at all. I just like, I was learning differently, right? Mm-hmm. And I had difficulties paying attention. I was never put on medication for it, and so, or therapy, and so like, it's just it's so difficult on the kid, and my mom never told me, and that brought me to like being misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder at 17, living years of my life thinking I had bipolar disorders, put on lithium.
Did your mom know you were diagnosed with bipolar?
She was with me.
And she was okay with it?
She never once looked at the doctor and said, wait a minute. Because I don't think even at the time that they fully understood what ADD or ADHD was. I think that they were, that just means someone can't pay attention and they're hyper. Right? Mm-hmm. That's not all ADHD is, right? And so I don't think that...
But even like the autism aspect with like, you know, the anger and irritability.
Nope. And I don't, like, all she said was we got in the car after a 10-question survey that my primary care doctor gave me. And maybe 15 minutes of him talking to me, was given medication the same day. Was not on paper diagnosed as bipolar because I was under 18 and they didn't want to do that before going to college and stuff. And my mom got in the car because my stepsister is bipolar, but she also has schizophrenia. And so my mom was like, "You're nothing like your stepsister. I can't believe this would happen." Blah blah blah. And I was like, "Okay." So then that also made me feel bad. Like, oh, my mom feels bad about me being bipolar. But being put on medication, then when it wouldn't work, I wouldn't necessarily tell anyone because I just, wanted to keep it quiet until like I was having like psychosis from the meds. But again, it was frustrating because I don't think enough was known at the time about autism or ADHD to know that like, I think if my mom truly knew how both of these neurodiverse like diagnoses interact, she would have been like, oh wait, I don't think this is bipolar disorder. I think it could be this and this, but she never did.
That's super interesting that she was okay with you going on medication for bipolar, but it was never like something that was brought up academically.
Oh, which is wild because like if I was having conversations with people, I could have really in-depth analytical conversations. It was translating that to paper and writing it out, right? And like by the time I got into like middle school, high school, I could read, and like I think by like ninth grade I was both caught up and in like honors, which I had to fight to be in, to be in that class because I could read and read well. It just took me a very long time. Like we had to read the Odyssey unabridged in a semester, and I was like, can I start reading it in the summer because baby could not read like 1,000+ pages in one semester.
I mean, thank God for SparkNotes. It's the only reason I made it through any lit class.
Honestly,
Anna Karenina, to this day, maybe like 20 pages I read of it.
And like, listen, Anna, I'm sure she's a nice lady, but too many fucking pages.
Too many pages.
Anna, no one's that important.
No. And I'm not gonna lie, I still got an A.
Yeah.
Only reading the SparkNotes.
Listen, SparkNotes, and then you can take quiz on to make sure you got it. I think that's.
And this was back in like the early 2000s, so like there wasn't all this like technology there is now, so you could kind of like skate by with the SparkNotes.
Do you remember when SparkNotes wasn't quite 100% online and you could buy the SparkNotes like at Barnes & Noble?
For sure.
It was like
for Shakespeare. I would always buy them for Shakespeare.
I need this. This isn't a question. I will be fucked if I don't have this.
Oh, I had SparkNotes for everything.
Yeah. I took a dramatic literature class and we had to read Midsummer Night's Dream, which is so ironic because eventually I was in the show. I did not read that thing in its entirety until I was in the show, and then I just still didn't read it. It's too long. I
can't even tell you the last book I finished like cover to cover. I like my ADHD. I don't know how it ever. I guess it got missed because I was so good at like adapting. Yeah. Like I still got good grades even though I read like 0 pages of the book. Right. And I'm also good at talking, so I'd be able to like take like one little paragraph and like conceptualize it, and people are like, she is so smart. It's like, I love Anna Karenina.
Let's talk about why the door was red.
Yes.
It meant nothing, but you made it mean something because you're like,
for sure. Yeah, just that door.
And you're like, there's actually a big reason for it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna find out there's not.
The entire concept of the book was built around this red door. Yeah.
And it's
that's what I would do. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, but I think that's interesting too because I like going through this entire thing in high school and then post high school and college and full floundered in college the first time around. And in adulthood, it wasn't until I was teaching for at that time 10+ years and was going back to school, and I thought to myself, okay, if I'm going to be teaching full-time and in school full-time, I was teaching 40 hours a week and then was taking 24 credit hours because I don't know what's wrong with me. And I was like, I should probably go get an evaluation done just to like check in with everything, also get back on meds if I need it. And that's when I found out was not bipolar at all. Not even a little bit. Not remotely close. I was told I had ADHD and binging disorder. And I was like, I guess I've always been like hyper, so that might make sense. But I shit you not, like the first time taking medication for it and then starting therapy too, because I wanted like holistically, that was one of the first times in probably 10 years I read a book cover to cover because it was quiet in my head for the most part. And I thought, oh my God, this is, what it's been for years and years and years and years. And like, I just never knew it. Like later in life diagnoses of ADHD specifically, I could get on medication. So that's important. Like being on meds helped. I was also very calm on meds, which I've never been calm a day in my life. And so all that was helpful. And I was a little quieter, not in a bad way though, just as a way to, I was more thoughtful, I think. But it was all these years of like invalidation of like, I can really understand the material now when I still have dyslexia, like that doesn't go away, but like when my only concern is the dyslexia and not the inability to focus, the dyslexia doesn't feel like, it's not as bad, like truly it's not.
Well, I think one thing too, and I see this a lot, I've seen this multiple times this week even, is this feeling that kids have of being stupid. And it's not something that they're usually very forthcoming with, but two separate occasions in the past 2 days, I've asked my kids, do you feel stupid? And like both times that the kids got emotional and were like, yes. Even one of them gets straight A's and feels stupid.
Right.
So, and whether that be because of the amount of time it takes them to complete tasks or like how much effort they feel like they have to put in to like get there or whatever. And when you have that feeling of being stupid, whether it's because you have an undiagnosed, neurodevelopmental disorder, autism, ADHD, or you have a learning disability that hasn't been diagnosed, or you have a learning disability that is diagnosed, how is that feeling of being stupid not going to lead to depression and anxiety?
And, learn hopeless and helplessness. And like, it's hard. And I think that also, like, we don't do a great job at uplifting kids of like, if you can't excel in a math or a language or science or whatever, like there's so much different types of intelligence too. And like, I think that there's value in every type of that. And I feel like we don't go like, the one thing I loved about going back to school for social work is doing strength-based care, where we see like their strengths and we like heighten that and we encourage that and we get them confident in their strengths, and then we work on what would be considered like places, areas of work, not weaknesses, but. And I don't feel like, again, I feel like this is like shouldn't be a newer concept, but it kind of is. And so like I was never sat down and was like, you're good at drawing, or you're really good at gym or anything that has to do with like athleticism because you're like have a lot of energy and like that was never encouraged at all. I was just like I couldn't read, and that was what was focused on.
Well, I think that's how we are in mental health in general. Like whenever I diagnose someone with borderline personality disorder, I always make sure to say like there are positive aspects of this that we can focus on, like the fact that you have a very wide range of emotion, which means you can feel positive emotions really strongly. You can connect with people. You empathize really well. You can a lot of times like read the feelings of other people. You're usually good at getting what you want. I mean, which can serve you well in life. So my classic line is like, you need to use your powers for good instead of evil against yourself, really, with BPD. But I don't think we like focus on the strengths of any of these diagnoses that we make. And there are strengths.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, obviously, like, depending on the diagnoses and like where you land with that diagnosis. But yeah, there's not to say that's not difficult, and not to say that like it's not hard, but like there can be, some positives to it, right? And there can be some positives in just the validation of having it, because like I'd say a year after getting the ADHD diagnosis, like there are so many things that as I was talking with my therapist that like I would say like so many of the issues I've been having for years and years and years like dissipated or we were able to work on because I was regulated enough that I could like hear and ground myself and but then there was still these we would talk about things kind of infrequently, or I would mention something in therapy, or I'd be like, I just don't feel very connected to people, or like I had a lot of anxiety because I was going to my friend's house who like they could be like my best friend in the world, and I was like, and I wasn't able to like fully practice the conversations I wanted to have, and it kind of made my therapist be like, what? Like, yeah, like. Or I was like, I remember walking in one day and be like, I'm sorry, my stomach hurts so bad because I was seeing, like, I went out with some friends and I was like, they were all standing in this way and I felt like I had to like suck in and like, and he's like, why would you do that? I'm like, everyone does that. Like when you realize how everyone else is standing or sitting in a room, like you follow suit. And he's like, no. And then I had gone out to dinner with some friends and had anxiety and I went to the bathroom and just sobbed because I was in the middle of a long table and I couldn't pay attention and help facilitate conversation. I don't know how to explain it other than that. Like I was there and like this person would be talking and I couldn't, and I was on my ADHD medication, just something like I didn't know how to contribute, how to discuss, how I was thinking about what I wanted to say in my head and I couldn't say it or it didn't feel relevant anymore. It was very strange. And then he was like, let's talk about some things as a kid, right? And then he finally goes, I feel like for a while, as I've talked to you, asked you obscure questions, like some of it has been just wanting to know, but you know, as an adult gets older, it's really difficult to sometimes do a autism diagnosis because what is potential trauma and a learned behavior of, like, my stepdad was incredibly emotionally abusive. So what is a trauma response to that, or what is a sensitivity to sound? What is a trauma response to, like, the stuff you're wearing because that's something you were accustomed to because you guys grew up incredibly poor and you were very used to that, well, you know, all that stuff. And so I remember he was like, okay, so like, I think we're at a point now where I can decipher that some things you're going through isn't trauma, and I'd like to start, you know, an assessment of autism. And I was like, okay, like that's, and by this time I was like almost done with graduate school. I'm like, I don't have autism, but that's great of you to. And I remember him asking the questions just every single time he asked one, it felt like someone was like punching me in the chest, because I was like, yeah, but everyone does that. And he's like, no, they don't. He's like, you know, talking about like socks, for example, he agreed and we brought that up and was like, would you ever wear, like, what are your favorite kind of socks? I said this. He goes, would you ever wear this? I'm like, I would never even buy that. Why would you buy that? But like, everyone has a preference for socks. And he's like, sure, but like, if there was another pair available or they went to the store and that brand or whatever wasn't there, they would probably buy another brand. And I'm like, no one would do that. He's like, 100% they would. Like, and I mean, that's just a simple thing. There was a lot of very in-depth stuff. And he was like, I'm pretty confident that we can say that, you know, you're autistic. And I remember being, and I found out when my husband wasn't home. So I was just like a puddle. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do with this? Like, I feel a bunch of emotions. And I remember talking to a former teacher I had about it when I was on tour. And, you know, I got this diagnosis. It's been really difficult. And they're like, did you get re-diagnosed? And I was like, no, I got diagnosed. And they're like, Telly, I'm confident that it was in your IEP as a kid. I was like, oh, okay. They're like, I know it was in your IEP as a kid. Did your mom not tell you? And I remember being devastated. Again, not because I had it, but because had I known for years and years and years, it would have validated so much. And then it was difficult because I'm like, sat there and I don't think my mom did it maliciously by not telling me. I think she, like we had talked about before with the parents, but I remember just being like, what the fuck do I do with this? And then I didn't feel like I could talk about it on social media because I was like, I don't know that do I get to claim that, or will people say XYZ about me, or will they be like, you don't really have it? So I was just like, it's a weird place to be when your entire life you're told you're really fucking weird and you're told all these things about you and you're made fun of constantly, and then the same group of people that called you that when you're like, oh, I've been diagnosed with autism, like, you seem so normal. And I'm like, ew, first off, why are we using the word normal and abnormal? But also, like, I'm confused. Am I weird? Or like because I get an answer for some of those quirks or the atypical behaviors I had, and you're now discarding them because, so it was a long fucking journey to this. And like, I feel like when I told you, don't get emotional, Tal, you're one of the few people when I talked to you about it, it wasn't like you were super inquisitive about it, but you never once I don't say that because like, I think there's people that have an understanding of like, oh, like, but socially, like this and this, and I'm like, oh no, like socially I'm screaming underneath, like I'm picking my cuticles, I'm like trying to do what I've been told I have to do in a social setting or situation, but like I had finally, I think, surrounded myself with people that I cared about that were like, okay, that makes sense, and didn't sit there and like make me feel shitty or invalid.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you told me, because you had so much that was like internalized, like I wanted to know what those things were, because you must have been compensating for so long. I was like, well, I mean, and part of me is like, well, I missed it. But of course I would miss it. You know what I mean? Like, I think we miss things all the time because we're not in someone's brain.
Yeah.
Like, you're not coming to me telling me like, Emery, I planned out this conversation before we had it and whatever.
Right.
So when you told me that, and I could be like, oh, tell me about what happens when this happens or whatever. I don't even remember what I said, but then I was like, oh, that makes sense. But in a way to like educate myself, not to like be like, prove you have autism.
But it wasn't even like I felt like you were proving it. It was nice that you were inquisitively like, asking questions that were like wanting to have a better understanding of the way it was presenting it, because it presents different in so many people, right? So I didn't ever feel like I was being put on the thing. It was like someone was like, okay. And it wasn't like a moment of like, prove it to me or I don't believe you. It was like, explain to me how it manifests in you so I know moving forward XYZ, because like it's true. Like I don't sit there and tell people like, oh yeah, I planned this conversation, or like it's really difficult to have conversations with people because I'm not late to respond or not listening to you. I'm trying to figure out what to say, because a lot of people with autism will if you say, oh yeah, I was driving yesterday and I hit a pothole, my way of responding to someone every time is to tell them a story about something similar that happened to me, and it's not making a conversation about me. It's because I'm trying to figure out how to relate to someone, because I don't feel like I've ever related to a human being in my life. And so many people are like, oh my god, that's so rude, they're like a one-upper. I'm like, I'm not. I thought that was so. There's so many times I'm like, every single conversation I have throughout the day, and it's so emotionally and mentally exhausting. It's like when I hear a story, I say, do I give them the anecdote about something that's happened to me? Do I ask them further stories about what they just said, or will they be done? And then, conversation switch, so none of that matters. I get to keep up.
I think that's one of the things too. I diagnosed 2 people with autism in the last 2 weeks, actually. And I was trying to explain to the parents that sometimes when you have difficulty identifying your own emotions, the way that you tack them or like define them is by moments in which you learned someone else felt that way.
Yeah.
So like the way you might define sadness is the way that your mom presented with sadness when you were younger. And so if something deviates from that definition, it doesn't make sense to you that that's sadness. Because then a lot of people will say to me like, no, they know to feel sad. Like they can recognize the face that's put in front of them. And I'm like, because they learned that. Like they're pairing this face with this experience, similar to what you said. Like when I hit a pothole and you're like, okay, when I hit a pothole, this is how I felt, or I think I felt, or whatever. So that must be how they're feeling, versus like, say I hit a pothole and I was like, whatever, I'm getting a new car anyway. And, you know, Colleen hit a pothole and she was like, my entire life is ruined because this is like, you know, my grandmother's car and blah, blah, blah. Like we have totally different feelings about it. But to you, it's like, well, this one situation happened. So that's probably how you feel.
And like, that again, like that's exactly what it is, and it's not talked about, and like sometimes it's even hard to find the words to explain that. And when I'm like talking with some of my clients that are autistic, I will always share with them the same, because I feel like it not to center myself in the therapy, because I just feel like it gives the person the idea of like there's a level of empathy or maybe understanding, but everyone's different. So but like for me it's like day-to-day life, like, and this was a huge thing with me and my husband. He's like, you don't talk to me, you're not emotional, you're not like, it doesn't feel invested. I remember when my mom passed away, feeling like I'm looking around to like check the cues of what I should be feeling. I felt sad, but I didn't know how to express that sadness. And so it was a very weird thing. And it wasn't until our friend's mom passed away recently that like I told Jason, my husband, when I was at the funeral, was that I just started sobbing, because I was like, that's how I looked. And I could see someone else's emotion to it, which is so opposite of what we're told about autism, right? Like I can sense someone else's emotions. I don't know how to facilitate that in me now, because I was taught at such a young age, tell you're crying too much because a chair's moved around you. So it's
because you're trying to tack the feeling to words and you can't.
Never. And so I sat there and I remember weeping, and so many times that we've been watching TV or a movie, and my husband's like, you're having a huge emotional response to this. And I'm like, I feel like I'm seeing something, or someone's describing words that I've felt that I've never been able to facilitate myself.
Yeah, the girl that I just diagnosed, she said the same thing. Like, it's so much easier for me to feel the emotions of characters in the books that I read.
It's like a tool, right? Like I have a client that I talk with, and I told them what I do, and they're like, oh, I do something similar. It's like if I know I'm feeling a specific way and I don't know why that emotion's not coming out, I'll listen to a song that I know provokes that. Or like, I will swear by this movie, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, like the movie, not the YouTube series, is a masterpiece in grief and loss.
I'll have to watch it.
And I was not ready. I thought it'd be a funny haha movie, and it is. It's adorable. But there's a phrase that was used in it, and every time I looked for a quote from the movie, it never came up because I don't think it was that significant for other people. But Marcel the Shell was talking about how, you know, sometimes when there's a party and it's really noisy, so you go off by yourself to get some rest because you know it's safe. And I still to this day am like, oh, because like I had never in my life heard someone describe it that way. That like there are times where there are people around and there's things facilitating and you don't know how to be part of it, but you still feel safe enough to kind of let your guard down. And I was like, and so there's so many times that like I didn't realize that everyday people can facilitate and talk about emotions. So I was just like, oh yeah, it's probably just like, and my therapist like, it could be trauma as a kid. You guys would never want to talk about your emotions or if you felt sick or whatever. But I think after a while I was like, I don't know if it's that or if when you were able to express emotion at a very young age, you were told this is too big, too much. And that like, it's this fine line of like unmasking, but not to the point of being debilitated by emotion, because I was as a kid.
Right.
But unmasking enough to be able to now facilitate and talk to it.
Well, I also think that you learned to assess the appropriateness of your emotions because, like, speaking about our friend's mom that passed away, like, the one thing that sticks out to me is, like, your main concern was, like, what if I don't show up the right way? And I was like, just like you went through the same exact experience. Like, of course you're going to show up the right way, but like you were very fixated on like, if I do this, then what will she think of this? And then what will happen then? And then like this whole like brain loop of like, I don't think I'm doing it right. And I was like, there is no right. Like, it's just like the shared experience, right? Like you could present 200 different ways. And at the end of the day, she's going to know that you lost your mom too.
Right. I think you and my therapist told me that was like a moment. I remember telling you this, and I was waiting for you to like laugh, and I was waiting for Jason to laugh or my therapist to laugh when I said this to them, and they just seemed so. Everyone just seemed so like touched. But I was like, I'm not a terrible therapist. Like I think because I can read people so well, I usually know, always kind of what to say or what to do. I've been very few times I have been like, you know, But my friend found out their mom got very sick at our home, and they were crying. They were in tube mascara, and it was literally looked like, you know, they were one of the chimney sweeps, just like it was all over their face. And I didn't know what to say in that moment because it was so close to when my mom passed away, and everything was just so eerily similar that I remember taking makeup wipes and like as they were on the phone with their dad, was like wiping their face and their hands, and feeling so embarrassed and feeling like that wasn't enough. But that was at the time the only way I could show it, and never once was my friend like, yeah, that was the worst thing to do, because like they got and they understood, and it was a way of still taking care of someone. But it was this idea that I remember being like, if I had done this at a younger age or anywhere else, my occupational therapist would have told me I was wrong, or you need to say this, or you need to do this. And so I think that it's just also giving myself grace of like, there are moments that you're not going to know what to say, and that has nothing to do with ADHD, autism, or any of that. It's just a human emotion, and that like you can give yourself permission, autonomy to. That's how sometimes you show up for people, you know. So I think it's definitely still a learning curve, and I feel like it's a big one. And I think that with so much stigma and so much decisions by who the hell knows, the people who are fucking DSM psychiatrists who, you know, that it's like there's so much more that goes into all these diagnoses that like we're not accounting for. And so it's just it's so sad to see how many people, like you said, it gets completely missed. And thank God I'm not someone who needed resources as in like, you know, like you said, like the county or stuff like that. Like my resource that I need was like, now we know we're going to work on how to open up, how to facilitate your own emotions, how to kind of deconstruct and unmask social situations, how to sincerely get closer to people, or like remind yourself, hey Tal, like if someone lost their mom or is going through a breakup or a divorce, like you should regularly check in. like that stuff that is important, but like there's so many other people who like need more than what even I did that are completely being missed, and it's horrific.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of it's, like I said, mental health stigma. Like if your mom would have felt comfortable probably like with herself and what she struggled with
Yeah.
to like accept it and like, you know, like get better and feel like she
Right.
could, she probably wouldn't have been so worried about like what people would think of you or what you would think of you or
Yeah.
those kinds of things. So like, you know, it always frustrates me when parents, aren't open about talking about mental health stuff with their kids because it just makes it like shameful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think also being Puerto Rican on top of that, right? Being Hispanic, like it is just within, unfortunately, with deep rooted in kind of culture that just like either pray it away or just like you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, keep it moving, you'll be okay. And like I wasn't fucking okay, Betty, I'm struggling, like, and so I think that like stigma and all that, like 100% we can't deny there's stigma around, our mental health in its entirety, but like I don't, and I'm not, I guess I'm not angry or hate my mom because I know that again it wasn't malicious. But like as I talked about this on social media, and I had a outpour of parents messaging me of like I haven't told my kid and they're 16 or haven't, and I'm like I get the not wanting your child to be stigmatized. I can understand that or can empathize with that, but you don't understand how invalidating they've lived their day-to-day life and how like there's empowerment in being able to put into words what you're going through in a diagnosis, right? There's so many adults out there now that are just like, I'm very confident I have ADHD or on the spectrum, but what's the point of doing it now? You're right, maybe you don't need or you're at an age or a place in your life where services or resources aren't available or aren't needed, but how validating to be like, oh, that's why all these things were happening. Like, if
Yeah.
anything, it's for yourself.
Yeah. And
Like,
sometimes people come to me and want to, like, as adults and want to evaluate for autism, and we go through it, and I say, like, you know, you could meet the criteria. I think it's, you know, probable, but you function really well and whatever. And they're just kind of like, yeah, I mean, I'm functioning well, but it's good to like understand where a lot of the behaviors that I've since adapted
Yeah.
originated, which is any diagnosis in mental health. I could see someone and say, like, you don't need treatment in some people because they're functioning well,
Right.
they've compensated. And, you know, I saw a woman last week that was compensating very well, like throughout her life for her undiagnosed ADHD. And I was like, we don't need to do anything because you're doing well. But if a day comes where you're not doing well, we understand that,
100%.
you know, this is what we can do. And I think even like I can empathize with parents because sometimes even as a diagnostician that's like supposed to tell someone what I think their diagnosis is, sometimes it's scary. Like, I'm like, oh, am I going to have the borderline personality disorder conversation today or should I just like push it off?
Yeah.
Or like last week when I diagnosed this kid with autism, I was like really apprehensive to say it. And eventually I like came out with it and he let out this like really loud like noise. And I immediately like recoiled and was like, let me explain. But like, he was happy. He was like, oh my gosh, like it's just so good to have an answer. And I think for me, like even in my head, I was like, maybe I'll just like diagnose the ADHD today and have the conversation later or whatever. Like these are the things I think in my head because I never want to isolate people or make them feel like I'm labeling them without,
Yeah.
you know, inappropriately or whatever. But ultimately, I think everyone appreciates being able to understand that other people share the same experience with them.
Yeah, and I think that's it's like this connectiveness or this realizing that there is a community out there or that like there's people who have shared experiences, right? I genuinely thought I was the only person in the world to have experienced this thing of like a parent not telling them, and then finding out that other people had parents not tell them, and then finding out that there were parents that were open about talking about it. And I was like, it made me feel so less isolated that I was like, and like again, a way to like in a way like forgive my mom, right, for it. So I think it's difficult because, again, it's not like I'm completely oblivious to that there's stigma. Like, I know there's stigma. But there's always this encouragement of, like, if we can validate someone and give them, like, again, that, like, strength-based kind of perspective of, like, there's nothing wrong with you. You learn differently, or your brain adapts differently, or what have you. That is such a validating moment of being like, okay, and I know this about me now, XYZ. Now I can reach out for these resources if I need them, or get into therapy if I need it, or for ADHD, let's start medication if I need that, or just after finding out about the autism diagnosis, a lot of the, like, depression I was experiencing kind of, like, not completely, but a lot of it just kind of fizzled away. So I was like, oh, now that I have an understanding of what's going on, it doesn't make me so sad. I'm just like, what the fuck is going on with me? That that I'm constantly thinking about conversations I'm going to have next. And I was like, oh, not everyone does that. And so it's okay to sit in this moment and be like, God, this sucks. This is really hard. But there's validation in that, to know that, like, not everyone's handling it better than you. Not everyone else does that.
Right. Well, and I also think for you, like, because the ADHD and binge eating disorder were then treated, those symptoms from the ASD, like, became more at the forefront because the things that were so functionally impairing were taken care of. And that happens all the time, like, sometimes we need to take care of mood before we can get down to the fact that there's an attention deficit. Sometimes we need to take care of the attention deficit to see the social challenges. But that's why it's important to work with someone who's going to, like, systematically go through these things with you and not give you a blanket diagnosis and say, like, A plus B equals C and then we're done, because it's never that simple.
And I feel like there's very seldom time in people's lives, and this is something we talked about, a bunch in school too, is that, like, your diagnosis can change, and your diagnosis probably will change, and it's okay to get reevaluated every once in a while, because, like you said, once the ADHD was taken care of, again, not like it was not an issue, but, like, we
less functionally impairing.
Yeah, that it was like, okay, but there's still some things going on, so let's figure out why. And then after checking off, okay, well, it's not a trauma response necessary from a childhood, then we're able to sit there and be like, okay, if there's this isn't a sign of ADHD, it's not a sign of trauma, it could be this. And I think with that openness, and again, surround myself with, like, a team of physicians and mental health workers that were able to listen, right, and be like, hey, this is a thing. I think I know I consider myself to be very lucky, given even all the circumstances of having to get re-diagnosed at 30, and having as a kid and not knowing, like, I consider myself still lucky that I was able to still get a diagnosis, right? When other people have been like, I've been waiting 6 months for it, and then they reschedule the appointment, now I have to wait another 4 months, and I'm just like, God,
Yeah.
no.
I mean, that's why I leave spots open, like, within 2 weeks, because I figure, like, who's like, I really need help, and then you're like, well, I'll help you in 6 to 8 weeks or 3 months or whatever. Like,
that's always driven me nuts.
Imagine how much courage it takes someone to, like, work up to, like, ask for help, and then you're like, okay, pre-K pause for 3 months. Yeah.
At the mental health center I worked at, both in grad school and then when I was out of grad school, clients had to see us, what was it, 3 times? Maybe more than that. They had to see the therapist several times before they could see the psychiatrist.
That drives me nuts. Do you know why they do that?
What?
Well, I can tell you from the organizations I worked for. So, community mental health typically breaks even or loses money on med management or psych. So they need to make it up with their clinicians. So that's why a lot of places will require you to see a clinician at that organization if you get med management there, because they will make zero money on you through med management, because they have to pay the physicians more than they get reimbursed.
And what they would do for us too is, because they would, when they got their evaluations by the psychiatrist, it would be like, maybe if they were really, really, really lucky, they would get an hour, but for the most part, it'd be like 30 minutes. And so what they would do is, after we saw them so many times, they'd be like, what do you think the diagnosis is, and what should we be looking at? And then we'd give them, like, what our, like, prospective diagnosis was, and then the psychiatrist would evaluate that prospective diagnosis. So they wanted them to see a therapist enough to be able to be like, we think it could be this. But here's the thing about this, and I'm always, like, very upfront honest. While a LCSW can diagnose, I am not an LCSW yet. So the fact that I was working at a center that like I wasn't diagnosing them, but I was telling them like what I think it could be. Baby, that's why we have to do like 2 years of clinical work before we can start diagnosing, because that is a heavy thing to diagnose someone and to get it wrong.
I mean, some people don't operate the way that I do, but I don't even like to see records before I see someone, because I don't want like any preconceived notions about any diagnosis that has ever been given. Even if someone sees a therapist, I won't talk to them until after the evaluation, because number one, it's good for me to know that I'm on the same page with the treatment team if I am, or if I'm on a different page, that's beneficial for everyone. Like now let's figure out why
100%.
we are. Like I want my own original ideas. And that's the reason I had to go into private practice, because the last community organization I worked at, they had me doing 10-minute med managements. So 6 in an hour. And I eventually said to the chief clinical officer, if I'm working 12 hours and your son is the 72nd patient I've seen that day, do you want me deciding what medication to put them on? Like, it makes me feel yucky.
Yeah. When we did intakes within an hour, we had to have the diagnosis we thought it was, goals and plans set up, and like all this shit. And we sometimes weren't even, I never did an intake where the person wasn't my client. I refused to do that. It made me feel yucky. And then you throw them off to the therapist, and I'm like, an hour is not enough time. So I was like, what happens if I go, and I was an independent contractor for the place, so I was like, what if I go longer than an hour? Like, well, it's your time. Like, you don't get paid for 2 hours if you do an hour. Like, the intake's an hour long. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care. Like, I'll take an hour and a half then. They're like, but you should be able to get through this much in a week. I can't do that. Like, I don't think that I can, hey, can you tell me all of your trauma? We're going to take this ACE. We're going to have you take a bunch of other surveys, and I need to have a idea of your diagnosis and figure out where to put you with a therapist. No. An hour for them to have to go 3 or 4 times and then see, and that's 3 or 4 times to schedule. So they would go, I think it was 3. They had to see you 3 times, and then after that, then they could schedule with a psychiatrist, which was always like 6 weeks out.
I mean, it's just like the horrors of our mental health system. Like my friend Molly jokes with me all the time, because I would talk about how frustrated I was when I had to do rounds at the hospital. It was a pediatric mental health hospital, and like literally I would have to see over 50 to 60 kids in like a very short couple hour period on Saturday, Sunday. And like literally what I had time for was, I had like a prescribed script. It was like, what's your mood today? Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? And what's your goal for the day? And then it was like, all right, get your friend next. And I hated that. But like at that point, you need to like fulfill basic needs. So like, are they safe? Like, what's our next step? All right, you're safe, move on. Like, I couldn't sit there and like give people good care. You just can't.
And I think that's the thing. It's like, it's so impersonal and it's so shitty. And it's like, that's why I'm very, very fortunate that when I got an evaluation, when I called, it was scheduled within a week. When I wanted to see a therapist, I called and was somehow, there was an opening for a therapist, a great therapist. And I saw them like, I think I had the intake like 2 days after that, and then regularly started seeing them. So to get things scheduled and facilitate that was easier. But then there's people who talk, or I see clients that have like, I've been looking for a therapist for, 3 months or a year. And every time it's either they don't have availability, I see them and it's not, we don't jive together, or like they are only doing in person, they're only doing online, and I want the opposite. So I'm like, thank God I was able, because that's how I was able to get these diagnoses. There's people out there that are looking for these diagnoses, are trying to find someone to help them out, and it's like impossible.
I know. It's really sad.
It's not impossible to get us, though.
No, we're here.
We're here
every week and every day. And if you live in Pennsylvania or Massachusetts, we can do more than just the podcast.
Exactly. We can do more than just listen to us. You can reach out to us if you need
services,
or
therapy, psychiatric evaluation. Or is that psychiatric evaluation? Yeah, to visit with Ruby. Ruby's actually been like really great for my clients. Like, you would not even believe like how people's faces change, like holding her.
I'll be in my office and I'll be like writing an email or getting ready for like an online session or what have you, and like I hear the of her little feet on the thing, and you'll be like, do you like dogs? And the person's like, yes. Like right away I'm like, oh my gosh, like the mascot of
I
the
know
company. It's so funny to me.
I know. I've been trying to convince one of my clients to adopt another dog for like several months, And she came to see Ruby like a few times, and like she just texted me yesterday that she's getting a dog on Friday.
Gotta do it.
I know.
Gotta
It's just, it makes like such a huge difference for so many people.
It's healing. It's good to have something to.
Right,
reason
Ruby?
Being forced to have to get
Look,
out of
she's
bed
like,
for-
don't wake me up.
Please. Oh my
Ruby, how do
gosh.
you feel about being our office dog? No?
She's like, I'm very shy.
Yes, I'm very shy.
Oh my gosh.
Except she cries at the door the second she hears another human,
Yeah.
like in the office at all.
She's like, oh, I just need to be where the people are.
She's like, I hear Tellykins. I have to go smell his carpet.
I have to go smell the carpet and poop on it.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't pooped on your carpet in a
I
while.
think she's like nervous now.
I
It
know.
was just a treat.
Yeah. After she pooped in the bathroom, oof.
You're no.
No. My Louboutin went right into it. It was, and it was right before a client came in for an eval. And they were Louboutin sneakers, so it had like the logo on the bottom. So it's just like all on the bottom of the shoe. I have the shoe like in the sink with the sprayer. I got the carpet shampooer out.
Oh my god.
It was a bad scene.
You're like, I can't have this.
Yeah. I was like, Ruby, this is not the
We
look.
can't be pooping. We should be pooping in the bathroom, but not if you're not human.
This is not the vibe.
Yeah. We
No.
haven't potty trained you on the toilet. Like,
No.
Like a cat.
You can't even reach the toilet,
She
sister.
could not. There's no way.
No.
She don't got jumps like that yet.
No.
Oh my gosh, what an episode.
Ooh, that was,
know.
I mean, Tellykins got emotional.
Emotional, which is like, we're learning how to do that at this point.
Yeah. And I'm learning how to not do that. That's great.
We have different goals to work
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, exactly.
Let us know what you want us to talk about. Again, this episode was kind of something that people asked me to share about, and we're receptive. So if there's things you want us to talk about, mental health stuff you want us to touch on, current pop culture stuff that you want us to touch on and give our opinions, but not our necessarily diagnoses.
Right.
We'll do that. So
yeah.
give it to us. Let us
Q&A.
know what questions you have. We love a
You want to know about our life?
Yeah.
Tell you more about my toxic relationships?
Yeah.
No, I think I've already disclosed
I was
them all.
we'll talk about dogs or whatever.
My patients, when they come in here and they see the podcast sign, they're like, oh, I'm going to look up your podcast. I'm like, please do not listen to the one about relationships because I don't know if you'll come back.
Yeah, you're those who can't do. I would say those who can't do.
No.
Therapize.
No. I've been like avoiding giving my mother-in-law the link because I'm like, Colleen, she cannot listen to that one episode.
She can't.
It's so bad.
Where my mother-in-law is like, that's hilarious. She's like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh my God. All right. Yeah. Let us know what you want to hear and see from us. And we'll be back next week.
We will.
Bye.
Bye.